Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India's World with me, Frank Razam Pereira. The Maldives foreign minister will visit Beijing before the end of 2018, officials said on Wednesday, likely seeking to renegotiate the archipelago's Chinese debt. China has loaned billions of dollars to countries around the Indian Ocean and beyond for infrastructure development, stoking fears of a debt trap. The new Maldives government of President Ibrahim Solih has called for a review of Chinese bankrolled projects initiated under predecessor Abdulla Yameen. On this edition of India's World, we will analyze the changing equations in the Maldives. Joining me on the program today are Professor S.D. Muni, Foreign Affairs expert, K.P. Nair, strategic analyst, Sreeram Chaulia, Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs, and we are also joined by Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, retired defense expert. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Professor Chaulia, let's look at another aspect that has taken place of late. Of course, the Maldives deciding to be a part of the Commonwealth. Now, what do you make of that?
Well, Frank, I think I just want to rejoin to the China element as well first. The question is not whether we want Washington consensus or Beijing consensus. I think both are equally neocolonial. And the question is, what kind of autonomous choices can small and weak countries have to be able to hold their own and to be able to hold their own governments accountable for the kind of shadowy foreign policies they are enacting. And the Chinese are expert at it in terms of buying elites, in terms of bribing elites, and in terms of overtaking the physical infrastructure as well as the policy space of many countries through blatant bribery. So this is, if this is not neocolonialism, then what is it? And so I think for the people of Maldives, one of the reasons Ibrahim Solih won the election and why we have a revival of democracy there is because it was a rejection of this China-dependent model. So let's not downplay the nefarious intent of superpowers when it comes to their unequal dealings with small and weak countries. Second thing on the broader issue, I think you see you mentioned the Commonwealth and attempts to. I see this moment 2018 as a kind of a second coming of a democratic transition, which had been stalled, and it's very important. Prime Minister kept on mentioning when he was there the word democracy. And it's very important for us to emphasize that rule of law, democracy. And on the other hand, President Solih was repeatedly saying that there were lots of these dubious decisions taken for infrastructure, for loans, on trade, on major projects, which actually did not benefit the people of the Maldives, and therefore there has been a pushback against it. So as a sovereign will of the people of that country is saying, we don't want the China model, and it has not solved any of our problems. Just to give one example, the housing situation. Now, the Chinese companies have been building all these luxury condos and apartment buildings in the last few years under the previous regime. And they did not actually ease any of the space constraints that people are facing in Malé, Hulu Malé. Most of the urban centers where there's dense concentration of people, they are living in tiny little cramped apartments, and they needed space. And the Chinese could not solve it. But in turn, they have this model of what we call debt to equity swaps. And that is, I think, a very insidious and a vicious means by which they are able to capture real estate, capture public policy, and capture elites. And I think there is a pushback coming from below, and that is good. And if it is also geopolitically beneficial for India, there's no reason why we should not encourage this pushback.
Right.
So I think there's a reason why we are worried about China and worried about also, I'm not an advocate for Washington consensus either. Let the Bretton Woods institutions as well as the Beijing consensus, both of them meet the reality, which is people's desire to live with equity and with justice and to have their own autonomous choices. I think that's a central question. If India can play a role in getting the people of Maldives or Sri Lanka or any other country in our region to be able to have autonomy of choice, I think we would have succeeded.
Professor Chaulia, let's look at Maldives now holistically. Maldives is not just about Maldives, India and China. There are other players, there are others who've been interested in the Maldives as well. How are the others going to be looking at the situation in the Maldives right now?
Well, Frank, for one, I see the Commonwealth as more like a normative player right now. It doesn't have any kind of it's not the vehicle of one big power any longer. So I don't fear, in fact, Britain, France, Canada, none of these really have any power projection capabilities in Indian Ocean region anymore. So these are like, the strategic environment of the 1960s or 70s is not comparable to today. Today, the biggest, the one on the prowl is China and, of course, the United States. These are the two big players, and they will be key. So I think for Maldives to join the Commonwealth is a strategic move by Solih and the civil society in Maldives, because they know that they need support for long-term democratization. And the Commonwealth actually has, principles to excommunicate and expel members if they are transgressing the democratic norm. And they have done so for Pakistan many times. For example, whenever they had military coups. So I think it's helpful to bring about this transition. As to other actors, I think we do need to partner with others. For example, we have the Asia-Africa growth corridor idea with Japan. We have, our own hopes for creating the Sagarmala, the Prime Minister Modi's vision, expanding. By the way, Prime Minister was supposed to visit Maldives 2015, and the other two countries that are part of this, triangle or quadrangle is Mauritius and Seychelles, where we are providing naval and other kinds of surveillance support to those countries. Madagascar is only just a little further away to the east coast of Africa. So we need to think about these island countries, just as we have now a institutionalized strategy for the Pacific Island nations on the eastern side, eastern end of the Indian Ocean. We need a similar one for these four, including the Maldives. And Maldives was not conducive as long as the old regime was in place. But now we should look at how we can enhance their monitoring and surveillance, and also to be able to hold its own economically. Because one is the debt, the other is, it's not able to export much. Just for information, 360 billion is what the Chinese exported to the Maldives, and less than $500 million is what the Maldives was able to export to China under this free trade agreement. So the so-called fisheries boom that the previous regime was promising was not coming from China. So we need to be able to buy more Maldivian products. We need to have Indian business over there in a bigger way, and we need to connect with the other pieces of the puzzle, which is Mauritius, Seychelles, and Madagascar. And then we have a kind of an island chain of prosperity and security for India's future.
Professor Chaulia, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Frank, Maldives is the lowest country of the world in terms of sea level, and it faces a massive environmental crisis, one of the small island nations that is threatened. India has sustainable development models that is superior to the Chinese high energy consuming and carbon emitting footprint. And we should emphasize social housing, sustainable development. These are the two things on which we have the strengths to build the capacity of the country along with their educational system. That is going to be the winner in the long run and will secure the wishes of the people of Maldives, which is reflected in this new transition that's happening.
All right. On that note, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for